Welcome everyone to the third episode of the Off the Record podcast with Noah, Rayan, and me. And today's guest is Mr. Roberts, our director of our school. And
Very lucky to have you this time.
Yeah.
One of the most high profile we've ever had.
Yeah. Celebrate the end of the school year. So.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. And could you just start off telling us a little bit about where you're from and where you, grew up and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. I'm South African. I think my dad's forefathers arrived on about the fifth boat that arrived with the 1820 settlers, and I think it was the 29th of April, 1820. And
specific.
my mom's, it's very specific. It's and my mom's family arrived long before that with the sort of Dutch settlers in the Cape.
Makes sense.
It's the Dutch settlers.
So my family's been in South Africa for hundreds and hundreds of years, and so I'm South African. I carry a South African passport. Which is difficult in traveling sometimes, but it means I have to get a lot of visas for wherever I go. I grew up. I grew up just outside of Johannesburg, in a town called Benoni, famous for, amongst other things, that's where Charlize Theron grew up. So it's probably our only claim to fame.
With you, of course.
Yeah, well,
Mr. Roberts and Charlize.
grew up. I grew up in a really relative. A poor family. My family. We struggled to make ends meet from sort of day one, and so my whole of my sort of growing up, I was either helping my dad. He was a sign writer, and so I started welding signboards when I was about 12 years old and putting them up and getting on ladders and fixing cars and
Hands-on.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And so it's I think my upbringing very much has had an impact on who and what I am as a person. I went to local schools. The schools that I went to were the government schools within walking distance of my home. So primary school I went to is called Tom Newby Primary School, and the high school was Benoni High School, and both of those were nothing like ISB.
Yeah.
We went to school, we came home, and didn't have nearly the types of opportunities that our students have today. But I think had a happy childhood, had a great group of friends, I really enjoyed my childhood and my growing up. I think when I was a youngster, my mother, my parents really never knew where I was, but always knew the sort of rough geographical area, and so we were around there somewhere. And
The general
often,
area.
Yeah, that's right. And often, 15 of us would arrive, and then Mom would make us lunch. And so
So you were happy in there.
very much so. Very much so.
And your friends from back then, do you still keep in contact with them? Or?
Yes, some of them. I mean, it's difficult when you leave. I mean, I've been out of South Africa now for 20 years, and even before that, I left Johannesburg. I taught in Johannesburg for 2 years, and then I left, and I went up to Mafeking, which is quite far out of Johannesburg, and so I've got a couple of friends that I'm still close to, but not many. I mean, really probably 2 or 3.
Have they ever come visit you here?
One of our friends has visited me here in Switzerland, and then also when I was in Singapore, they came to visit. The other hasn't. We see each other maybe every year or every 2 years. We tend to go home back to South Africa at least once a year. And so we'll then touch base when we do that. And friends that you grow up with, you might not see them for a year or 2 years, and then when you do, it's like you saw them yesterday. You know,
When you were there, what do you foresee your future as growing up? When you were with your friends, hang out in the countryside.
you know, I mean, you know, when I grew up, the sort of lifestyle that I had was just not even on my radar.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it was only really when I made the decision in sort of my second job to move into an international school in South Africa, where I learnt for the first time that international schools even existed, and so this was an option for me. And so, no, I mean, I made a decision probably when I was about 16 that I wanted to become a teacher, and I expected that would be in a government school in South Africa, and
So this
that's
is
where I'd
beyond
go. And
what
so,
you would have dreamt of.
like a million miles. I mean,
Switzerland also. Like.
well, Switzerland. I mean, the whole experience. And to be fair, my children's experience, and part of the reason we left South Africa, is we wanted to give our kids an opportunity that was so different to ours. And so leaving South Africa to embark on an international school experience was, you know, a complete step into the unknown for us, but it's something we've absolutely loved.
And so, like, before you left South Africa, did you spend time in university there? How did your education look like?
So I mean, the only way I got to university was accepting a bursary through the local education department to study to become a teacher. And so without that, I came from a family, there was just not money for that. So I got a bursary to study teaching. And I went to the University of Witwatersrand. We call it Wits, Wits University. I arrived there, and I'd planned to become a maths teacher. And then I did so badly in maths in my last year of school, I got to register. They said, no, you can't register.
I felt the same.
Your grades are too bad. And so I ended up having to register for a degree in zoology.
Yeah, we saw that. We were a bit confused.
We were like, how did that happen?
That's right. No, well, that's how that happened. And I did sub-majors in physics and chemistry. But they wouldn't let me study maths. And so I ended up doing my degree in, I majored in zoology and botany with physics and chemistry as sub-majors. And then when I went for my first job, I had no interest in being a biology teacher. And so there, as many countries do, there was a massive shortage in teachers to teach science. And because I had the physics and chemistry, I applied for and I got a job in South Africa, you do what they call physical science. And that's a combination of physics and chemistry. And so my first ever job was that, and I never sort of looked back from that. And so I was primarily a physics and chemistry teacher for my first couple of years. And then when I moved to my first international school, I applied for a physics job. And so I got that, and I was going to teach A-level physics, which effectively was beyond where I was, and so
so kind of had to wing it.
Well, it wasn't so much winging it. It was, you know, I sat with every, you know, in preparing every lesson, I sat with 3 or 4 physics books to sort
Revise
of teach myself the content before I taught it to students, and so I suppose it allowed me to really understand where the difficulties were going to be for my kids. And I think it made me a very effective physics teacher. I mean, I'm not a physicist, but I'm a very effective physics teacher. And so that then became my route for the next sort of probably 10 years. And I moved across to the International School of, when I moved across, it was called the International School of Bantustans. It was in one of South Africa, because of apartheid. The South African government created a a whole range of these what were called Bantustans.
Oh, yeah.
We've looked at it in history.
Well,
And
maybe
one-
just explain what a Bantustan is.
Yeah, well,
for
that's
the
it.
viewers.
And so effectively, these were places where the South African government said black South Africans could go and vote, even though for many of them they'd never set foot in that area. If you were Swana, the place was determined by the
Homeland.
South Africa as your homeland was called Baputetswana. And these and so for if you were Xhosa, it was Transkei and Ciskei. If you were Zulu, it was KwaZulu Natal. It was Venda, it was up in the northern Transvaal.
Segregation, but
So with other words, now black South Africans couldn't complain that they couldn't vote because they could vote. It was just in a place that somebody decided.
That was
Reserved.
isolated, no trade, everything
Correct.
controlled by the South African government.
Correct. And so these Bantustans, Baputetswana was one of them, had a lot of sort of freedoms to do things. So, for example, Baputetswana was sort of the capital of gambling for South Africa because they could have gambling and the rest of South Africa it was banned. And so you had places like Sun City developed. Sun City is this massive gambling sort of hub.
just in the middle of nothing.
In the middle of nothing, in the
yeah.
middle of nowhere, and
Vegas.
I suppose, in a similar way in the States that some of these sort of
Native
Indian
American
area,
reservations,
correct?
they-
The reservations,
sovereignty they use.
correct. And so Baputetswana was one of those, and so I was there in sort of 1994 when South Africa moved and had the first democratic elections, and just before that there was a big sort of uprising in Baputetswana, and I was in the school and we had students in the boarding house, those students who we couldn't get out in time, and they were burning places down and people were getting shot, and it was pretty scary stuff. After that, the school changed its name from the International School of Baputetswana to the International School of South Africa. And so, I moved into house parenting there for the first time. My wife and I were house parents. We were house parents for about 13 years.
What is that exactly?
And so effectively it's a boarding school.
Okay.
And in the boarding school, we were responsible in Mafeking for 50, 11, 12 and 13-year-old kids, and they lived there, full time during the term, and basically we were like their parents
While they were at the school.
they were at the school.
Okay.
And so we did that. I did that for 5 years, and then from there we weren't sure what we wanted to do, and we moved back into one of the very prestigious private schools in South Africa, St. John's College in Johannesburg. Did that for 5 years, and we decided we'd had children in the meantime. I have two boys, and we decided we really wanted our boys to experience a different way of life, and the international school really attracted us to give our kids an opportunity to grow up with people from a variety of different backgrounds. Because of course my experience had, I went to a school that only had, it was only for white South Africans, and so I didn't grow up with an experience like you
Diverse
guys have.
environment.
We had no diversity, to be fair, and so we wanted something different for our kids, and so I then applied for, and I got the job in Japan at a school called Hokkaido International School in Sapporo. A very tiny school. I mean, the high school had 78 kids, and I was the science department.
The whole science department.
The whole science,
Entire-
the high school science
biology.
department. So I taught.
Oh, not the biology.
I taught grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9 general science.
Yeah.
Was there more like reading the book before class and then teaching what you just read?
No. The interesting thing is it was an American school without any sort of set curriculum. So I decided what I taught, and so actually it was great. I had complete freedom, and so made sure there was as much sort of hands-on learning as possible. and I think I did some of my best teaching there. And then grade 10, I taught biology course. Grade 11, I taught a chemistry course, and grade 12, I taught physics and introduced AP physics at the top.
And so this is not an IB school. It's just
It wasn't an IB. It was really it was an
AP
American
or-
school.
Okay.
It was the AP physics I introduced was the first AP course they had done. But I had 5 students that were very, very strong, and I thought could do it, and they all sat it, and I think we got 4 top grades and 1 pass, and so we were extremely happy with it.
We got a pass.
Yeah, we did.
to
We
hear.
did. So very, very pleased with that. And in addition to that, I ran the boarding house as well. So I looked after 20 kids in the boarding house, and I was the science department, and that, I was a science technician, and I was in charge of school security, and I was a football coach, so it was
Almost
like
everything.
The whole nine,
It was
the whole
it was great. It was very, very different. And then from there, we applied, and we got a job as house parents at Eglon College here in Switzerland, and we were there for 5 years, looking after 50, basically probably grade 9 to grade 12 students. Pretty challenging, but we're there for 5 years. It was a very interesting experience. And then from there, I went to Qatar, where I was deputy head of school and in charge of sort of pastoral. So I suppose very similar to the role that Mr. Thomas has.
Oh, okay, yeah.
'Cause
So more
it,
student life oriented.
yeah. And then after, I think it was after 2 years, I was promoted to head of secondary, and then after that, deputy sort of head of school or deputy director role.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, and so that was Qatar.
Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to go back a bit to South Africa.
Yep.
College. Yeah.
Well, maybe even before that,
Oh.
or anything really, because when talking to other teachers at the school, like Mr. Bosman, who's also South African, and talking about their experiences during apartheid, there's often these experiences that he had back then that seemed really normal.
Oh yeah.
And then you look back at it now and it's like
unimaginable,
crazy and
yeah.
unimaginable that
Unimaginable.
you would do, or like something like that would happen. Do you have anything in your past where maybe it was like something happened to you where you're like, back then it was like normal, and now you look back and it's like, I can't believe that
just
happened.
changed. The way you
Well,
think about
it was all normal. I mean, you know, the South Africa I grew up in, the media was controlled by the government. The government owned the newspapers and the TV stations, and therefore you grow up in an environment where you get a message that's
Curated. You're
consistent
conditioned.
all the time. And so we grew up knowing that only whites voted, and the reason only whites voted is that the blacks were communist, and we were fighting against the Russians. I mean, when I finished my university, I went to the army. I did 2 years of national service, and even in that time, I spent quite a bit of time on the border between Namibia. Well, it was called Southwest Africa then. Namibia and Angola, and on the other side of the border were 150,000 Cubans, and we were on this side with the South African Defence Force,
Cold
and
War.
it was very much, us against the communists.
Dumb,
and so
like-
yeah, that's right. And so you grow up like that, and I think you just accept that it's just normal. It's what everybody does. I mean, I went to. I'd go to a shopping centre as I grew up, and there would be toilets, and those were the toilets for whites, and those were the toilets for blacks, and even church, there were no people of colour in my church because we went to a white church, and so I think it's really easy for you to accept that the status quo is what it is. I mean, the South African government even did research to show that black South Africans were genetically different.
Research.
Well, that's right. And whites were superior, and all of this stuff is part of what the narrative
The grand
is.
apartheid
Correct.
ideologically. Yeah.
And I suppose the the first time that I really was exposed to something different was at Wits University, and Wits was a very sort of a liberal English-speaking university.
Yeah, we found it had like a poster on the university. We have an image there.
It says that the image is from 1986, which says you attended at that time. Yeah. But honestly, the image looks a little bit older than that. You can see the image over there. Is that you see it like in the middle over there? Yes. Was that in your time, or was that? I think it's before.
Maybe we can.
It's on that big building.
A place where men and women, without regards of race and color, are welcome to join in.
Yeah, look. I mean, Wits was very progressive for South Africa. I mean, I was there at a time when there was significant sort of student unrest. There were times when we had to vacate our science lecture because tear gas was coming in because the police had come on campus and had fired tear gas. I mean, I remember one of my starkest things that I remember. There was a massive demonstration, and I wasn't very politically active. I wasn't really involved.
So you weren't like in the protest or anything?
But I was on top of the building watching. And so we were on top of one of the buildings watching, and there was this massive protest, and the police were right at the end of the road, and they were just waiting to see were the students going to try and come off campus, because the police generally allowed the activities to happen on campus, but you wouldn't be
a step
allowed
further,
to come.
and then
absolutely. And so we were watching from above, and there was a guy in his car, and he was it was a white guy, and he got into his car and he was trying to drive out, but there were thousands of protesters, students, and he was slowly trying to drive through, and I think one of the protesters smashed his window and broke it. And the guy got out and he had a gun and he shot in the air. And all of a sudden, these protesters started running towards the police. And of course, the police thought that these guys were charging him. And so the police started running towards them, and it just chaos. And I was thankful I was on top of the roof.
Just observing silently.
But it was an interesting time. I mean, it was because sometimes in the environment you get both the best, but you also get the worst. And so it was the time when Winnie Mandela, who is the wife of Nelson Mandela, she was sort of promoting the idea of we called them necklacing. So basically putting this tie around people's necks and burning it for people who they thought were sort of government, government agents, and so it was a very difficult, very violent time.
Was it after when MK and when the armed struggle was starting? Or?
Well, so that started. I mean, that was part of it. I mean, that started quite early. I mean, that started, I think, in the early 70s, late 60s, and so this. But it was. Things were starting to change in South Africa. I mean, they hadn't changed, and we only had our first elections in 94. I graduated in 87. But things were starting to change. I mean, there were, the sanctions against the South African government were in full force, and so there was a lot more external pressure on the South African government to change. In the end, that's why they did, is that they couldn't afford
economics.
They couldn't afford to carry on. It was a very expensive.
What could you notice inside the country with all these sanctions on you? Could you notice things?
What was the first sign of change?
You didn't look. I mean, to be fair, that wasn't the story that the government would be giving. I mean, I imagine it's very similar to what's happening in Russia at the moment. You are hearing one side of the argument, and so the South African government was, we can cope, we don't need, sanctions are not a problem, etc., etc. But the reality is the South African rand started to come under pressure, and eventually that's what really compelled the government to make the decisions it was making. It was because they couldn't afford it anymore.
And you couldn't notice any of this while you were during the time, right? So when did you find out that all these things were happening? The government was lying and stuff.
Well, again, I think Wits University and what you heard there. But again, you also have to, whenever you in these environments, you have to try and judge, what is real and what is not. And so you always get in these things, you get two sides of an argument. And so the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. You don't know whether it's in the middle or to one end. And so, I think that was the first time I really began to realize the extent of the issue, because, you would see videos that you would have never seen out of the university in terms of police brutality, etc., etc.
Did you vote in the first democratic
election?
election?
I did, yes. My wife and I were living in Mafeking then, and we went to the voting station. We waited hours and hours because there were just millions and millions of people voting for the first time. And so I remember it was one of those elections where you had to go and you had to dip your hand into this special chemical that was fluorescent under a fluorescent light, so that's the way you made sure you didn't vote a second time somewhere else.
Oh, okay.
And so we all had coloured fingers, and so it was it was a very special day. I think we all realised that South Africa had to change, and so I think we were pleased to vote in those first elections. It was a very special day for us.
Maybe we can move on a little bit to, you moved to Japan obviously after South Africa.
Yep.
And that was the first time living, outside South Africa for you. How was that contrast? How did that change how you see the world a little bit?
Well, I remember, it was a couple of things. I remember we had accepted the job in Japan, and about 2 months later, we went into a bookshop and we got one of these Lonely Planet guides, and I opened it, and on the one page it had the weather, and I said to my wife, Jeanette, the average temperature in December is minus 25 degrees Celsius. It must snow there. And of course it snowed. I mean, they had the Winter Olympics in Sapporo, I think in 1970 or something. And so we had no idea that's what we were going into. And we traveled from South Africa. And South Africa, the unemployment rate in South Africa is just phenomenally high. There's a massive divide between rich and poor. And so, you live in houses that have high walls and security gates and security doors and panic buttons and all those sorts of things. And I remember we flew across, we got picked up and we got dropped off at our boarding house where we were living when we lived on the ground floor. And the first night we couldn't get to sleep because there wasn't a single burglar bar on any window when we were living on the ground floor.
Did you have to play it, the burglar sound, so you could follow?
Oh man, it was. Well, to be honest, we were very fortunate because we never really had any serious issues in South Africa. I mean, I had a break-in where I came home one day and everything was gone, including my toothpaste and my underpants and every single thing. But there was nothing violent, and so we were fortunate that we didn't experience anything like that. But going to a country like Japan that is as safe as it is, it took us a while getting used to, being able to walk around at night and not worry about it. Having no burglar bars, and you can leave your door and your windows open, and so. That took a lot of getting used to, because when you grow up in a country like South Africa, and even now when we go back, we click into South Africa mode as soon as we get out of the airplane. Whereas we've been blessed to live in places like Japan and Singapore and Switzerland, which are some of the safest places in the world, and South Africa is not quite like that. And so that was a fairly big adjustment for us. And then, of course, obviously it was the schools that we taught at were very different to what we were used to from growing up. And so that's been an interesting journey for us all the way through.
So I know a lot of students here don't really understand the concept of sleeping in school, like boarding schools. And I know you've taught, I think, 3 boarding schools. Just can you explain the rationale behind it and why you sort of had so many jobs as a housemaster, especially?
Well, look, and there are many different reasons parents send their children to boarding school. And so when the boarding school I taught at in South Africa, in Mafeking, most of our children came from places where there weren't great schools. And so parents sent them because they really didn't have access. We had a lot of children from all over Africa that came to the school, people whose parents owned farms and there weren't schools close by, so they needed a school, and this, the only way of getting that was actually sleeping there as well. Yeah. But then there are other, a place like when I was at Eglon College as a boarding school, almost all of their students come from all over the world. It's one of the most expensive schools in the world. It offers a phenomenal program, like PE in the winter. You're up on the mountain skiing 3 times a week. It's
the dream.
Wow.
And it's a sort of quality of schooling, I think, that you probably wouldn't get. And then, of course, the connections you get because you're growing up and spending time with students who come from the same sort of background as you. Those sorts of connections you have, travel with you for life. And so in the UK, sort of it's that old tie network, and it's the same sort of thing for boarding schools like that. And so I think different, when I was at Eglon, we'd have kids from Mexico, from very wealthy families who had come to boarding school, and wealthy families in Mexico is very, it's sometimes difficult to be able to have the sort of normal childhood because the fear of being kidnapped, et cetera, et cetera. And so the boarding school offered that you didn't have otherwise.
Small world for the child, protected.
That's right.
Safe,
Could you see that happening for ISB, or do you think that wouldn't work as well here because the way?
Well, of course, we're a school that oh dear.
Okay.
We're a school.
A little bit lower.
We're a school that okay, you get that in answer. Okay. We're a school that obviously we cater for the local families, and so there's no real need for that. So I don't expect we would ever think about going into boarding as a school, but who knows?
Never say never.
And I expect
never say never.
Yeah.
I expect there'd be a bit of backlash from the local community. Maybe. Do you think you have problems with that, or it's not really something that's required or wanted?
I don't think it's a requirement for a school like ours, and so no, I don't think we'd ever do that.
When you're here, like in Switzerland or Hokkaido, is there anything that you miss specifically from South Africa, like food or?
I'm less worried about where I live. I mean, my personal life and my work life are so strongly interwound that it's I'm not that bothered where I live. There are silly little things. The only thing, the thing I bring home when I go to South Africa, the thing I bring home, I bring back to whether I was in Singapore or back now in Switzerland. I bring 5 Roses tea. It's a very nice South African black tea, but that's about the only thing. Other than that, I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin. I mean, I think my wife misses her family a hell of a lot more than I do. I'm fairly comfortable wherever I live, and I don't particularly worry too much where it is. And so I've enjoyed wherever I've been. I mean, I love living in Basel. far more than I enjoyed living in Singapore. And it's probably weather related. I mean, you know, as soon as you stepped out of the house in Singapore, you sweat. And so I love the climate here. I love the ability to get out into a forest. You know, we have a dog and we'll go walking, and literally across the road from our house is a forest, and you can go into the forest. And I love that. I love the how close you can be and are to nature. And if you need to, you can get into town fairly easily. I live in Ash, and so it's a fairly simple drive. But I actually love the village. I love Ash as a village. I think it's a great little village, and I'm very pleased we chose to live there.
Yeah.
Yes, it's still from your childhood, that like of the outdoors and nature and being able to explore.
Well, I didn't do that much. I mean, I was a member of the Boys Brigade from a very young age, and so you know we went out, and I remember one Boys Brigade trip where we went out on a 2 or 3 day hike, and our adults dropped us off, and there were about 10 of us, and we then had to make our own way to the meeting point, which was miles and miles
Kind of like DOE.
Oh, a little bit like DOE. And our adults gave us the wrong point to meet, and so we got lost, and basically we didn't get to where we were supposed to meet, and all of a sudden we had to put tents up in the middle of some farmer's field that night, and we had no food and we had no water, and it was
That's traumatizing.
And the adults were running around all over trying to find it, because we had, you know, that was before mobile phones, so we had no mobile phones.
Sitting in a farmer's field.
Just waiting for someone to rescue you.
And literally it took them 2 days to find us.
2 days.
You know, it was, and we had a wonderful time. You know, but our parents were a little more worried than
No,
we.
that's
And so I didn't do a massive amount of outdoors. I mean, I did a little bit there, but you know, where we grew up, you had a lot more freedom as a child, I think. And it was a lot simpler. I think to some degree, life in Switzerland as a child is a little bit more similar to how I grew up, where you have the ability to still move around and not have to rely on parents picking you up and dropping you off.
the kids go from young on the tram. And
That's right. And I think that's a little bit more, you know, it's more similar to how I grew up.
And I think Noah wants to talk about the future a little bit, about Vision 2030.
Yes.
Yeah, the first thing, unfortunately, that jumped up to me is it sounds a bit like the Saudi Vision 2030, and I'm not sure if that association was purposeful.
Bit of inspiration
No,
there.
it certainly wasn't purposeful. You know, I suppose, you know, to be honest, it's the ISB strategic plan.
Okay.
Now,
not as catchy.
to call something a strategic plan is a bit boring, and you know,
borrowing from the kingdom.
Vision 2030 sounds better than Vision 29.
Yep.
You know, 2029, and so. But more importantly, it's supposed to indicate where we're hoping to go as a school. And you know, one of the important things for schools is, ideally, you need to know yourself. And so, a lot of the work I've done has been around making sure we know who we are as a school. But really importantly, you've got to have a clear idea of where you're going. And so we haven't had a strategic plan for some time. And so the board and I worked, we agreed we needed this. We worked with the board, we worked with the staff to come up with really a roadmap for the future for the school. And that's what Vision, you know, 2030 is about, is making sure that we are future ready as a school, that we continue to give our students the type of education that will remain relevant for them. And, you know, one thing that COVID confirmed for everybody is how important well-being is. And so it was natural, and a lot of schools have had to focus more on well-being as a result of that. And so that's one of our pillars, making sure that we provide our students not only with a program that looks after their well-being, but more importantly, that gives them the tools to look after their own well-being, because we really have to be resilient. We have to have the tools that will allow us to meet the challenges that you guys are going into. I mean, the world is changing dramatically, and so GTP, for example, is a very simple example of how things come around and disrupt. And the important thing for us as schools is to make sure that our children are ready to basically evolve and change as their futures change. And so that's where that well-being thing comes in. Also, the second pillar on that is around a future-focused education, making sure you as students, we develop and evolve our programs so to give you the skills to be able to evolve as the work evolves. And so it's unlikely, that you guys are going to go into one job and stay in that job for the rest of your life. Those days are sort of over. And so we're going to move from one project to another, from one program to another, from one team to another, and having the skills to be able to do that becomes more and more important. And so we have to evolve our program to be able to do that. And so that's what the second pillar is. The third pillar is around sustainability, and that's not only sort of environmental sustainability, and that's important, but also sustainability as in terms of how we adapt and how we, to be able to work with these different teams to make sure we're able to meet to meet the challenges that are going to come our way as we go through. And so sustainability is one of those. And then the last is really this focus on, a holistic education, making sure that, we're not just focused on grades and getting an IB score, but actually we have a much more rounded education. We give kids an opportunity to be involved in sport and activities and clubs and music and drama, and while we're not going to be the best sports school, and we're not going to be the best music school, and we're not going to be the best school that for outdoor education, hopefully we can do some and all of that to some
Develop
degree.
Students that are
Correct.
capable
Well-rounded.
in every aspect.
That's right, and allow you as students to find the thing
that's important.
that really
The spark that-
That's it. That so that and so what we hope ISB does in the future, and will does now and will do better in the future, is open up doors for students. And so hopefully you find your passion. And if you find your passion at school, that impacts the rest of your life. And so a school that offers a really broad, holistic program has a far better opportunity and chance to do that for so many more of their students. And that's really what the focus is about, making sure we do that better. But the other thing, we've been trying to do as a school is also to make sure that ISB is a school that is constantly improving. And so hopefully, as we go through, students, in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years' time, each year we want to be a school that is slightly better than it was.
I've
the
seen
year
a lot of
before.
changes. I started in PYP2,
Yeah.
so over the years it's
Yeah.
transformed a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right. We brought into the junior school this year the dual language program, and it was probably something that was overdue for us as a school, because we think that that's really important. A lot more of our families are staying in Basel for much longer, and if you're going to be able to integrate with the local community, one of the very important things is having the ability to do that language-wise. And so those things are really important for us.
Okay, and then kind of maybe, or do you have one more question?
No, just in general, like a lot of your former jobs were engaging with students, maybe. Now it seems your job is dealing with teachers, and in some instances, having unfortunate talks with students, as I have for some experienced somewhat. So do you miss having that, like being able to engage with students? And
Look, I mean, it's interesting, because that is, my role my role now is certainly more removed from students. We have 3 principals on each of the campuses whose primary role is to focus on the students, and so. But no, I mean, yes, I mean, there's certain aspects that I miss. I think I'm a very good, very effective teacher, and so to some degree I miss my teaching, but I actually love my job. I love the opportunities that I have to really impact the whole organization. I've got 2 primary functions. The one is really I'm responsible for everybody that we hire. Okay. So the most important people in determining the quality of a school are the teachers that we have, and so that's the one function. And the second is sort of strategic planning, making sure that we have a direction of the school, and those are mine. And then of course in a school like ours, especially where we have not only have 3 divisions, that's fairly common, but 3 divisions on 3 different campuses. One of the major roles I have is trying to keep us as one school where that makes sense. Okay. And so that's another big part of what I, with the principals and my extended school leadership team, we focus a lot on. How do we make ISB one school rather than 3 completely separate schools?
And so how do you plan to manage that, obviously, with the new 4th planned campus coming up?
Well, we won't have a 4th campus. I mean, if we are fortunate enough to get a new campus, it will replace Fichton. Okay. And so it'll be a shift around rather than, because you're right, adding a 4th campus would add another layer of complexity. But no, I mean the aim isn't to have a 4th campus, but to replace Fichton, which is a facility we rent rather than own.
Okay.
And then last time we also had a challenge for
Rayan. we had a challenge for Rayan.
I don't think we need to go into it this time.
So last time with Mr. Thomas we did Welsh, but in South Africa you speak Afrikaans or Xhosa, or as Mr. Bosman taught us. Let me try it. Or something like that.
Well, I mean, South Africa's got, I think it's, we have 11 official languages. I think we just added a 12th because sign language became an official language. Wow. But when I grew up, I attended a government school, and we did English and we did Afrikaans. We didn't do any of the other African languages. And so I speak Afrikaans, and then my 2 years in the army was only Afrikaans. And so
truly immersive.
My Afrikaans is redelijk goed.
Redelijk goed. That's pretty good.
And Seb's Dutch can sort of.
I think I can read. If you get those packages that have got Dutch and Italian and French and German. I read the Dutch because I can read Dutch and understand Dutch. And when I fly in on KLM, I can understand what the pilot is saying.
Koninklijke Luchtvaartmaatschappij.
As long as they speak slowly. But I think Dutch can understand Afrikaans a lot easier than.
I don't know. But what I do know is that we actually call. I think so, from what I've heard, is that we call Afrikaans colorful Dutch in the Netherlands. That's our name for it.
Do you have a nice word that Rayan can say?
Like a hard word or something that Rayan could try out?
Well, I mean, our best. We had a Springbok rugby player. And his name was particularly difficult for people to pronounce. Okay. His name was Gerry Germeseis.
Gerry Germeseis.
Yeah, well, that's pretty close. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's very good.
It was better than his Welsh.
No, the Welsh is horrible.
His Welsh took a couple of. Can you try your Welsh again?
No. I don't want to embarrass.
What was the first syllable?
Of what? The Dutch?
No,
not the Dutch. The Welsh.
The Welsh.
I don't remember now. It was too long ago.
Whatever. Okay.
Well, I think that's it.
Well, that's it.
Thank you very much. It was really
thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We really appreciate getting to know you better. I mean, me personally, I've never really had any conversations. First conversations with.
We've had.
No. This was the. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah.
But
Okay.
this was one of the more positive
Yes.
ones.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it was
it
good.
was.
It was good.
It was good.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank
and,
you, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, and this was our last episode for this year. But maybe we'll be back next school year.
We will be back next year.
Oh, we will be back next year with some more of the staff members.
Yeah.
Maybe so. You watch out, staff members.
Coming from the
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.